Completing the square. In the first few math problems, I asked you to just solve for C. Well, there are 3 steps. First, you will take half of B, which is 6 in this case, to get 3. Then you will square your answer from step 1 to get 9. Step 3 is you will just put the answer from step 2 in for C and you are done. Now we've created a perfect square trinomial. For the next problem, I'll follow the same 3 steps. I will take half of B to get 14, square 14 to get 196, put 196 in for C, and I end with a perfect square trinomial. It doesn't matter if B is negative or positive. Half of negative 1 is 1/2 or negative 1/2, but when I square it, I will always end with a positive. That is why I don't worry about the sign in front of B very often. 1/2 squared is 1/4, so I put that into the equation for C, and now I have a perfect square trinomial. When it comes time to solve, I will first ask myself, is this a perfect square trinomial? Remember, to determine if you have a perfect square trinomial, is this a perfect square? Yes. Is this term a perfect square? Yes. Then we have to do the test for B. Is 12 2 times the square root of A times the square root of C, so 2 times the square root of 1 times the square root of 36 is 12. Therefore, I have a perfect square trinomial. After I realize I have a perfect square trinomial, I will factor square root of the first term, A, square root of the last term, C, sign in front of B. I carry down the equal 4. Using the square root property, I will take the square root of both sides of the equal sign. So I will get x minus 6 equals positive 2, x minus 6 equals negative 2. Add 6 to both sides, and I end with 8 and 4. Our next problem, again, I have to ask myself, is this a perfect square trinomial? Is A a perfect square? Is C a perfect square? And then I test B. Is 2 times the square root of A times the square root of C equal to 16? And it is. I will factor, take the square root of the first term, the square root of the last term, the sign in front of B. Using the square root property, I'll take the square root of the left and right hand side of the equal sign. So I end with x plus 8 equals 3, x plus 8 equals negative 3. When I solve, I end with roots of negative 5 and negative 11. Again, the same process. Is this a perfect square trinomial? Yes, it runs through the test and it works. So I will factor first. So I end with x plus 2 squared equals 7. Again, using the square root property, I take the square root of the left and the right hand side of the equal sign. I realize 7 is not a perfect square, so I will later in my calculator convert that to a decimal. So I would end with the math problem, x equals negative 2 plus the square root of 7, x equals negative 2 minus the square root of 7, to end with roots of 6/10 and negative 4.6. In this question, you are asked to find what number did he add for C. Again, I will follow the 3 steps. I take half of B, square it. That would be the number he added for C. 7/2 squared is 49 over 4. In this math problem, we're going to solve by creating a perfect square trinomial. Following the 3 steps, take half of B, square it. I add that to C. If I have 36 added to the left-hand side of the equal sign, and now I am solving, I also need to add 36 to the right-hand side of the equal sign. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Factor the square root of the A term, the square root of the C term, and the sign in front of B. I added the numbers on the right-hand side of the equal sign to get 49. Use the square root property. I get x plus 6 equals 7. X plus 6 equals negative 7. My solutions, or x-intercepts, would be 1 and negative 13. If I were to test this as a perfect square trinomial, I know it is not, because 6 is not a perfect square. So I'm going to create one. I will then move positive 6 to the other side by subtracting 6, leaving me C. Take half of B, square it, put it in for C. If I add 25 to the left-hand side, I have to add 25 to the right-hand side. Factor, take the square root property. Again, I am left with x minus 5 equals positive square root of 12. X minus 5 equals negative square root of 12. Solving, enter that in my calculator, rounding carefully. Again, if I'm going to solve, I know 50 is not a perfect square, so I will move it to the other side so I can find C. Half of B squared, put that in for C. If I put it on the left, I have to include it on the right. Take the factor both sides, take the square root of both sides. Then I will end with x minus 9 plus the square root of 40, x minus 9 minus the square root of 40. Using my calculator, rounding carefully, I end with negative 2.7 and negative 15.3. This one, I have to first move the math problem to standard form. So I have my A term, my B term, my C term. Then we need to set A equal to 1. Once I have done that, I'll ask, is this a perfect square trinomial? The answer is no. I will then move the 18 over, find C, half of B is 3, squared is 9, add 9 for C, add 9 on the right-hand side. Factor the left, add on the right. Now I will use the square root property and I begin to solve for my roots. My roots are 8.2 and negative 2.2. Round carefully. Ooh, we have a fraction. We all know how to work with fractions, but we know that also getting rid of them makes our life a little easier. To get rid of 1/2, I will multiply by 2. Therefore, I'm left with a trinomial x squared minus x minus 20 equals 0. Again, 20 is not a perfect square, so I will move it to the right-hand side of the equal sign and solve for C. 1 cut in half is a half, squared is 1/4, add it to both sides. Factor. Using the square root property, I end with x minus 1/2 equals the positive square root of 20 and 1/4. X minus 1/2 equals the negative square root of 20 and 1/4. Using my calculator, I end with roots of 5 and negative 4. In this story problem, I will substitute 20 in for the y because y is the profit. 1800 is not a perfect square. These are big numbers, but we can handle it. I subtract 1800 from both sides. Then I will find C. Take half of 50, square it, and I get 625. Add that to the right, add that to the left. Factor, use the square root property, and solve. Now we're talking about a story problem. Does it make sense for a negative answer in this situation? No. I need to only select 10. In this challenge problem, I have included a video of a beautiful solution for you to view, and the math problem is drawn out and provided all the work. Another challenge problem that I proposed talks about buying jerseys. They give you this equation. It's just a little weird looking because of the decimal. 430 is the cost, so I put 430 into the equation. Decimals and fractions, we both know how to use them, but I like to eliminate them, so I'm going to multiply by distributing 0.1 to everything in the equation, and I end with a nice trinomial. What I also notice, this trinomial is not a perfect square trinomial, so I'm going to subtract 250 from both sides. I will find C, half of B squared, I get 144. I'll add that to the left, I'll add that to the right. Factor the left-hand side, combine my terms on the right-hand side. Square root property, I end with x plus 12 equals the positive square root of 4194. X plus 12 equals the negative square root of 4194. Using my calculator, I will solve. Because this is a story problem, again, I need to ask myself which answer makes the most sense. In theory, if we're going to just graph to create parabolas, both are great. In the story problem, this is great. Also, have you ever seen 7/10 of a shirt? So the best answer in this situation would be 53.